On the night of the 21st of April, 1933, a 70-year-old man who had not walked through a factory door in over 2 decades sat up in his bed in a cottage on the Sussex coast and sketched a design on the back of an envelope. He handed it to his nurse and told her to send it to the boys in Derby. By morning, he was dead. The sketch arrived at the Rolls Royce factory after its creator was already gone. Henry Royce had given everything to the pursuit of perfection. And perfection had taken everything in return, starting with the partner who gave the company half its name. This is the story of 2 men who had nothing in common but ambition. 2 obsessions that created the most prestigious car brand in history, and the price they both paid for it. Chapter 1: The Boy Who Sold Newspapers for Kings. In 1872, a 9-year-old boy stood on a London railway platform selling newspapers because his father had just died bankrupt. His name was Frederick Henry Royce. He wore no shoes. He earned pennies. His father, James Royce, had run a flour mill in Alwalton, a village so small it barely appeared on maps of Huntingdonshire. The village sat along the Great North Road, a place of stone cottages and low hedgerows where the horizon was flat and the opportunities were flatter. The mill had failed. James had tried other ventures, each one smaller than the last, until there was nothing left to try. He moved the family to London, chasing work that never came. Then he died, leaving a widow, 5 children, and nothing else. No savings, no property, no prospects. Young Henry sold papers at railway stations and delivered telegrams for the post office. He ate when he could afford to. He slept where he was told. The London of the early 1870s was a city that sorted children quickly. If you had parents, you went to school. If you had money, you went to a good school. If you had neither, you went to work. Henry went to work. At the age of 14, his aunt scraped together enough money to buy him a 3-year apprenticeship at the Great Northern Railway Works in Peterborough. It was the only formal training he would ever receive. The railway works was a cathedral of iron and steam, and for the first time in his life, Henry Royce was surrounded by machines that did exactly what they were designed to do. He loved it. He studied every lathe, every forge, every bearing. He asked questions until the foreman told him to be quiet, and then he watched in silence and figured out the answers himself. When the money ran out after a single year, the apprenticeship ended. Henry was 15, alone, and educated just enough to know how much he did not know. That knowledge would drive him for the rest of his life. He drifted south to London. He found work at a toolmaker. He moved to Leeds and took a position with an electrical company. He taught himself algebra, electrical theory, and mechanical drawing by candlelight because he could not afford gas lamps. Every penny went to books. Every spare hour went to study. The subjects were not chosen for pleasure. They were chosen for survival. Henry Royce learned things because not learning them meant going back to the railway platform. By 1884, he had saved £20 and started a small electrical company in Manchester with a friend named Ernest Claremont. The firm was called F.H. Royce and Company. They made lamp holders, fuses, doorbells, and small dynamos. The products were unremarkable. The quality was not. Royce built everything as though a failure would send him back to barefoot poverty. Every solder joint was inspected. Every wire was tested. Every finished product was examined by Royce himself before it left the workshop. His employees learned early that there was no shortcut he would not detect and no excuse he would accept. Now turn the lens 300 miles south and 30 years earlier. Charles Stewart Rolls was born on the 27th of August, 1877, at the family's London townhouse in South Street, Mayfair. His father was John Allen Rolls, the first Baron Langatic, a man whose wealth was measured not in bank accounts, but in land. The family seat was the Hendray, an estate of several thousand acres in Monmouthshire, set among woods and parkland, with views across the valley of the River Monnow. The house was vast, staffed by dozens of servants, and surrounded by gardens that required a team of groundskeepers to maintain. It had its own gasworks for lighting. By 1881, it had a telephone, one of the first private installations in Wales. While Henry Royce was reading by candlelight in a Leeds boarding house, Charles Rolls was growing up in a home that had its own power supply. Charles was the third son. He grew tall early, reaching 6'5" by his late teens, a remarkable height for the era. At Eton, he developed two passions. The first was for machinery. He built a small electrical generator in his room and wired it to the school's plumbing system, delivering shocks to anyone who turned on a tap. The prank earned him fame and punishment in roughly equal measure. The second passion was for speed. He rode bicycles competitively, raced boats, and drove anything with an engine faster than its maker intended. His schoolmates gave him a nickname that would follow him for years: Dirty Rolls. His fingernails were perpetually black with grease, and his clothes carried the smell of oil and petrol. He went up to Trinity College, Cambridge, where he read mechanical and applied sciences. He was among the first undergraduates to keep a motor car, a 3 3/4 horsepower Peugeot that he drove through Cambridge at speeds that alarmed the faculty and terrified pedestrians. He entered the mille-mile race in France and finished respectably. He established himself as one of the most visible motorists in Britain, a young aristocrat who believed the motor car was not merely a rich man's toy, but the future of transport. By 1903, he had opened C.S. Rolls and Company, a motor dealership in Fulham, London, selling French and Belgian cars to wealthy buyers. The business was profitable. The clients were titled and fashionable. But Rolls was frustrated. Every car he sold had been made abroad. The French built the Panhards and de Dions. The Belgians built the Minervas. Britain, the workshop of the world, the nation that had invented the railway and the steamship, could not produce a motor car worthy of its own reputation. What Rolls wanted was a British machine good enough to put his name on. And 300 miles north, in a cramped workshop behind a Manchester factory, a man who had never owned a new car in his life was tearing apart a second-hand Decauville, two-cylinder, because he was disgusted by its sloppiness and certain he could build something better. The gulf between these two men was the width of English society itself. One born to thousands of acres and a seat in the House of Lords. The other born to nothing and educated by candlelight. One who had never lacked for anything. The other who had never stopped lacking. Their worlds should never have collided. But one man stood between them, a quiet shareholder with an eye for quality. And he was about to arrange a meeting that would change the history of engineering. Chapter 2. A Handshake at the Midland Hotel. On the 4th of May, 1904, a car dealer who wanted a British machine sat down across from a man who had built one in a corner of his workshop. The place was the Midland Hotel in Manchester, a grand railway hotel of glazed terracotta and baroque flourishes that stood beside Central Station like a monument to Victorian commerce. The broker was Henry Edmonds, a shareholder in Royce's electrical company and a member of the Automobile Club of Great Britain and Ireland. Edmonds had driven one of Royce's 3 handmade 10-horsepower cars and recognized something in it that went beyond competence. The engine was quiet in a way that other engines were not. The gearbox shifted without protest. The steering responded with a precision that suggested the man who built it had thought about every bearing, every bush, every point of friction between the driver's hand and the road. Royce had not built a car. He had built an argument against compromise. Edmonds wrote to Charles Rolls. He described the car. He described the man. Rolls was skeptical. He sold Panhard Levasseurs and Minervas to dukes and earls. He moved in circles where the motor car was a statement of wealth and modernity. Why should he travel to Manchester to see a car built by an unknown electrician who made doorbells for a living? But Edmonds persisted. He sent a second letter. He sent a third. And Rolls, whose instinct for machinery was sharper than his social prejudice, agreed to come. The 2 men met at the Midland Hotel on a spring afternoon. The contrast was immediate and complete. Rolls, 6'5", impeccably dressed in the manner of an Edwardian gentleman, every inch the son of a baron. Royce, 5'8", his suit modest and practical, his hands rough and scarred from decades of workshop labor. They were separated by class, by education, by every measure of social standing that Edwardian Britain used to sort its people into boxes. They were united by one thing. Both men understood machines the way a musician understands an instrument, not as a collection of parts, but as a whole that either sings or does not. Rolls inspected the 10-horsepower car. He lifted the bonnet. He examined the engine. He climbed in and drove it through the streets of Manchester. He listened to the exhaust note, felt the balance of the throttle, tested the brakes on a hill. Something in that car spoke to the part of Charles Rolls that cared more about engineering than inheritance. The car was not fast, it was not luxurious, but it was right in a way that the French and Belgian machines he sold were not. Every component worked in harmony with every other component. There were no rattles, no hesitations, no compromises that Royce had allowed to pass. The deal they struck was simple. Royce would build the cars. Rolls would sell them. Every car would carry both names. It was not a merger of equals. It was a merger of complementary obsessions. Rolls brought his name, his connections, his showmanship, and his ability to move among the people who could afford expensive motor cars. Royce brought everything else. The formal partnership took 2 more years to finalize. On the 27th of December, 1904, Royce exhibited his cars at the Paris Salon, and the response was strong enough to confirm Rolls's judgment. Through 1905, the 2 men and their small team developed a range of models: 2-cylinder, 3-cylinder, 4-cylinder, and a 6-cylinder 30-horsepower car that hinted at what was to come. Each model was better than the last. Each model bore the unmistakable marks of Royce's insistence that nothing leave the workshop until it was as good as he could make it. On the 15th of March, 1906, Rolls Royce Limited was formally incorporated. The nominal capital was £60,000, divided into 60,000 ordinary shares of £1 each. The minimum subscription required to launch the company was set at £50,000. They barely reached it. The money came from Rolls's social connections, from Edmonds, from a small circle of investors who believed in the quality of the car more than the certainty of the balance sheet. The company was real, but it was not yet rich. It was not yet famous. It was a small firm with a limited product range and an engineer who thought sleep was a form of laziness. There was a third man at the table, and his contribution would prove as essential as the other two. Claude Goodman Johnson had been the secretary of the Automobile Club of Great Britain and Ireland. He was not an engineer. He was not an aristocrat. He was not by temperament a man who attracted attention or sought the spotlight. He was something arguably more important, a man who understood that a great car without a great story was just another machine gathering dust in a showroom. Johnson became the company's commercial managing director. He handled contracts, he managed advertising, he developed commercial strategy, and he mediated the constant tension between Royce's perfectionism and the commercial reality of production schedules and delivery dates. Johnson understood something about Rolls and Royce that neither man fully grasped about himself. Rolls was a showman. He needed an audience, a race, a frontier to conquer. Stillness made him restless. Routine made him reckless. Royce was a monk. He needed silence, time, and absolute control over every detail of his creation. Interruption enraged him. Compromise disgusted him. These impulses could make a great company, or they could destroy it. Left unchecked, Rolls would chase spectacle until the company was all reputation and no substance. Left unchecked, Royce would perfect a single car forever until the company was all substance and no revenue. Johnson's job was to stand between the genius and the showman and make sure they produced something together before their natures tore them apart. The partnership was unequal and unstable from its first day, but for a brief, brilliant window, the arrangement held, and the car that proved it was already taking shape in Royce's mind. Chapter 3: The Factory That One Man Designed. Henry Royce did not merely build cars in Derby. He designed the building, the workflow, and even the height of the office windows. In 1908, the company outgrew its Manchester premises and moved to a new purpose-built factory on Nightingale Road in Derby. The site was chosen for its access to railway lines and skilled labor from the Midlands engineering trades. But the factory itself was Royce's creation. He oversaw every detail of the layout with the same obsessive precision he applied to an engine block. The building was a modular steel frame structure, designed so that individual departments could be rearranged as production methods evolved without tearing down walls or disrupting the flow of work. The machine shop, the fitting shop, the chassis assembly area, the test beds, the paint shop, all were arranged in a logical sequence that Royce had mapped in his head long before a single foundation was dug. The office windows were set at a specific height, high enough to let in natural light for detailed work, low enough to prevent workers from gazing outside at the Derby streets. Royce believed that distraction was the enemy of precision. A man looking out of a window was a man not looking at his work. This was not cruelty, it was doctrine. Royce did not build a factory. He built a monastery of metal, and the monks who worked there were expected to share his devotion to the pursuit of the flawless. Every apprentice who entered the Derby works learned the same lesson within the first week. Good enough was a phrase that had no meaning inside the Nightingale Road gates. A part that met its written specification but did not meet Royce's personal standard was rejected and remade. A surface that measured correctly with calipers and micrometers but felt wrong under Royce's fingers was ground again. He could detect a surface irregularity of 1/10,000th of an inch by touch, alone. His hands were instruments more sensitive than the gauges on his own workbenches. No two cars left the factory in identical condition. Each chassis was assembled, driven on test roads, partially disassembled, inspected component by component, corrected wherever Royce or his inspectors found cause, reassembled, and tested again. The fitting process was not manufacturing in the modern industrial sense. It was closer to the craft of a master clockmaker or a luthier building a concert violin. A crankshaft that produced a vibration Royce could feel through his fingertips would be balanced, adjusted, or replaced entirely, regardless of what the specification sheet said. The specifications were a starting point. Royce's judgment was the final authority, and his judgment never rested. This approach produced extraordinary results. The cars that emerged from Nightingale Road were quieter, smoother, and more reliable than anything else on the road. Owners reported journeys of hundreds of miles without a single mechanical complaint, in an era when most car owners carried a toolkit and a spare fan belt as standard equipment. But the approach also carried a cost that was invisible at the time and devastating in the long run. The entire system depended on one man's body, one man's attention, and one man's refusal to delegate any decision that mattered. Royce did not train successors to think as he thought. He did not create systems that could function without his personal intervention. He was the system, and the system was consuming him. By 1907, the company had adopted what amounted to a one-model policy. The bewildering range of 2, 3, 4, and 6-cylinder cars was abandoned. The market was confused by too many options, and Royce was exhausted by the effort of perfecting them all simultaneously. Instead, the company would concentrate every resource on a single chassis, a 40 to 50 horsepower 6-cylinder car that Royce believed could surpass anything made in France, Germany, or the United States. The car had a 7-liter engine with side valves and a 3-speed gearbox. The cylinders were cast in 2 groups of 3. The crankshaft was machined from a solid billet of steel and balanced by hand until it ran without the faintest tremor. The result was an engine so smooth that a penny placed on the bonnet would not vibrate off at idle. This was not an advertising trick. It was a test Royce applied to every engine that left his factory. If the penny moved, the engine was not ready. The car did not yet have a name. It had a chassis number, 40,551. Claude Johnson, the man who understood that great stories sell great machines, looked at the prototype and saw an opportunity no specification sheet could create. He ordered the coachwork finished in aluminum paint with silver-plated fittings. The bonnet, the door handles, the headlamp rims, all gleamed like polished cutlery. Johnson studied the result and gave it a name drawn from the English tradition of the supernatural. He called it the Silver Ghost. The name was perfect. It promised something ethereal, something that moved without sound, something that appeared and vanished like a spirit on a country road. The Silver Ghost was about to haunt every other car maker in the world. And the man who would prove it was not Royce, who built it, or Rolls, who sold it. It was Johnson, the quiet man with no aristocratic title and no engineering genius, who was about to drive this car further than any car in history had been driven before. Chapter 4, 15,000 miles and 2 shillings. Claude Johnson painted a car silver, named it after a ghost, and then drove it 27 times between London and Glasgow to prove a point. The year was 1907. The British motor industry was young, noisy, and profoundly unreliable. Breakdowns were not exceptions. They were expectations. A car that completed a journey of 100 miles without stopping was considered satisfactory. A car that completed 2 such journeys without needing new parts was considered remarkable. The roads themselves were barely worthy of the name. Outside of major cities, surfaces were loose stone, packed earth, or mud, depending on the season and the mood of the local council. Driving was an adventure. Arriving was an achievement. Johnson intended to make arriving routine. He took chassis number 60,551, the 13th Silver Ghost produced, a car already tested and approved by Royce, but not yet proven in public. Johnson entered it in the Scottish reliability trial in the spring of 1907. The trial covered 2,000 miles through the Scottish Highlands, over mountain passes, along coastal roads, through rain and wind and conditions that destroyed lesser machines. The Ghost completed the course without a single involuntary stop. It did not overheat. It did not seize. It did not falter on hills or struggle in mud. It finished the trial with the highest marks ever recorded in the event's history. Johnson was not satisfied. A good result in a trial was one thing. What he wanted was a demonstration so overwhelming, so statistically irrefutable, that no competitor, no journalist, and no buyer could dismiss it. He began the London to Glasgow runs. Back and forth, day after day, through rain and mud and summer heat, the Ghost covered the road between the 2 cities again and again. Johnson drove some of the legs himself. Company drivers covered the rest. The car ran in all weathers and at all hours. It was not pampered. It was not rested between runs. It was driven as a car should be driven, hard and continuously, because that was the point. By the time Johnson stopped, the Ghost had covered 14,359 miles in a continuous running test. The total cost of replacement parts during the entire run was 2 shillings and 7 pence. That was the price of a petrol tap and a small quantity of fuel consumed during an adjustment. 2 shillings and 7 pence for nearly 15,000 miles. The figure was so absurd that competitors accused Johnson of lying. He invited them to inspect the car and repeat the test. The Autocar magazine, the most respected motoring journal in Britain, published its verdict. It called the Silver Ghost the best car in the world. No qualification, no caveat, no suggestion that the French or the Germans might object. The best. But Johnson understood that reliability alone was not enough to silence every critic. Charles Napier, the head of the rival Napier Company, had been making loud claims about speed records and engine power. Napier's 6-cylinder racing cars were fast and prominent. Johnson could not allow the perception to take hold that the Ghost was reliable but slow, a gentleman's carriage rather than a serious machine. He took the Ghost to Brooklands, the new banked motor racing circuit in Surrey, the first purpose-built racing track in the world. The concrete banking rose at angles steep enough to make spectators dizzy. Johnson let the Ghost run at full throttle around the oval. The car reached 101.8 miles per hour. For a touring car, a car designed to carry passengers in comfort, the speed was extraordinary. Napier went quiet. Now consider what this car meant in the context of its time. The chassis price of a Silver Ghost was £985. A body, built by a coachmaker to the buyer's specifications, added several £100 more. A complete Silver Ghost with bespoke coachwork could easily cost £1,500 or more. A working-class family in Edwardian Britain earned roughly £100 a year. The Ghost cost 10 years of an ordinary family's wages before paint was applied. These were not vehicles for the general public. They were instruments of power, built for a class that moved between country houses, London clubs, and colonial capitals with the ease of people for whom geography was a minor inconvenience. The customers matched the car. In 1911, 8 silver ghosts were ordered for the Delhi Durbar, the great imperial ceremony marking the coronation of George V as Emperor of India. The cars carried princes and viceroys through streets lined with tens of thousands of spectators in the blazing December heat. They did not break down. They did not overheat in the Indian sun. They performed exactly as Royce had designed them to perform, without flaw, without complaint, without the smallest concession to the conditions that would have crippled any other machine. Between 1907 and 1925, Rolls Royce built 6,173 Silver Ghost chassis. Each one was tested individually. Each one was inspected by Royce's team. Each one carried the weight of a standard that no other manufacturer attempted to match. The production run lasted 18 years, an eternity in an industry where models changed every season. The Ghost did not need to change. It was already what it was supposed to be. The brand had reached its zenith. The Silver Ghost was not merely a car. It was a statement about what Britain could build when perfectionism was given authority over profit. It said that an unknown electrician from Manchester could outbuild the finest engineers in Europe. It said that 2 men from opposite ends of English society had created something that neither could have created alone. But the partnership was already cracking, not from failure, from success. Rolls had done his job. The cars sold themselves now. The name was established. The reputation was built. The aristocrat who had staked his credibility on an unknown electrician's workshop had been vindicated beyond any reasonable expectation. And Charles Rolls, the man who needed frontiers the way other men needed air, was looking at the sky. He had mentioned aviation to the board as early as 1907. They told him to focus on motor cars. Rolls smiled, nodded politely, and bought a balloon. He was about to fly away from the company that bore his name, and the sky would not give him back. Chapter 5. The Sky That Stole a Founder. In 1907, Charles Rolls asked his own board to build an aero engine, and they told him no. It was not an unreasonable request. The Wright brothers had flown at Kitty Hawk just 4 years earlier. The age of powered flight was opening, and Rolls saw it with the same clarity he had brought to the motor car a decade before. Here was a new frontier. Here was speed without roads, without traffic, without the plodding limitations of wheels on dirt. The sky was open and empty and limitless, and Charles Rolls wanted to be in it. The board of Rolls Royce did not share his vision. The company was building the finest motor car in the world. Profits were growing. The Silver Ghost was becoming a legend. Why risk capital and reputation on flying machines made of wood and canvas that crashed more often than they landed? The directors looked at aviation and saw risk. Rolls looked at aviation and saw destiny. The board prevailed. Rolls accepted the decision in the boardroom. Outside of it, he began to drift away from the company he had helped to create. He went ballooning first. It was fashionable, social, and relatively safe. A balloon could not be steered, but it could be ascended into, and for a man who craved height, ascent was enough. Rolls made over 170 balloon flights. In 1906, he won the Gordon Bennett Gold Medal for a flight from Paris that crossed the English Channel and landed in England. He set a record for the longest sustained balloon flight from Britain. The newspapers loved him. The public adored the tall aristocrat who floated above the English countryside in a wicker basket. But ballooning was not enough. Balloons went where the wind sent them. You could not choose your direction, your altitude with precision, or your destination. For a man who loved control and speed in equal measure, the balloon was a beautiful distraction, but not a true frontier. What Rolls wanted was powered flight. In 1908, he traveled to France and met Wilbur Wright. Wright was demonstrating his flyer at Le Mans, performing circuits of the racecourse at Auvers, with a control and grace that silenced the European skeptics who had dismissed the American claims as exaggeration. Rolls watched from the ground. He saw a man sit in a wooden frame, pull levers of ash and spruce, and command the air itself. He was electrified. He arranged a flight with Wright, sitting beside the American as they circled the field at an altitude that would terrify a modern passenger, but felt to Rolls like liberation. When they landed, Rolls was transformed. The motor car, the machine that had defined his professional life and given him his reputation, became secondary in a single afternoon. He would continue to attend board meetings. He would continue to lend his name to the company. But his mind was elsewhere, fixed on a frontier that moved at 80 miles per hour and required nothing beneath it but air. He bought a Wright flyer. He learned to fly it at the Wright brothers' school. He flew it again and again, accumulating more than 200 flights within 2 years. He studied the machine with the same intensity he had once brought to motor cars, learning its quirks and limits the way a horseman learns the temperament of a new mount. By 1910, he was among the most experienced aviators in Britain, a country where experience was measured in dozens of flights rather than thousands. On the 2nd of June, 1910, Rolls achieved something no one had done before. He flew his Wright flyer from Dover across the English Channel to Sangatte, near Calais, circled the field without landing, and flew back to Dover. It was the first non-stop double crossing of the Channel by aeroplane. The flight took 95 minutes. He carried a letter from the Royal Aero Club to the Aero Club de France and brought back a reply, a symbolic gesture that transformed a feat of endurance into a demonstration of aerial communication. The crowd at Dover erupted when he appeared over the white cliffs and brought his fragile machine down onto the grass. He was a national hero again. The newspapers filled their front pages. The public celebrated the daring aristocrat who had conquered the Channel twice in a single flight. But the hero was no longer interested in his own company. In February 1910, Rolls had formally resigned as the technical managing director of Rolls Royce Limited. The resignation was described publicly as being due to the pressure of his other interests. The truth was simpler. He had found something that thrilled him more than selling motor cars to wealthy men. He was making plans for the Rolls Aeroplane Company, a separate venture entirely. He still held shares in Rolls Royce. His name still gleamed on every radiator shell. But his heart had left the building. The partnership that had created the most admired car in the world had lasted barely 6 years of active collaboration. It was not a quarrel. It was not a betrayal. It was not even a disagreement. It was worse than all of these. It was indifference. Rolls simply cared about something else now. The motor car had been conquered. The sky had not. Royce, back in Derby, said little about the departure. He never said much about anything that was not an engine or a gearbox or a tolerance. But those who knew him noticed a withdrawal. He worked longer hours. He ate less. He arrived at the factory before dawn and stayed well after dark. The man who had already pushed himself to the breaking point of his physical limits pushed harder, as though proving that the company could survive without Rolls by demonstrating that it could not survive without him. Johnson, the diplomat, the mediator, the man who kept the seam from tearing, managed the transition publicly. The press barely noticed. The ghost kept selling. The factory kept producing. But the company had lost something it could not replace: the restless energy of the man whose name came first on the radiator. By July 1910, Rolls was preparing for the Bournemouth Aviation Meeting, one of the great air shows of the Edwardian summer season. He was 32 years old. He had flown his Wright Flyer more than 200 times. He was confident. He was experienced. He was happy in a way that motor cars had never quite made him happy. He had no way of knowing that 2 days before the competition, a French modification had been fitted to his aircraft's tailplane, and he had no way of knowing that the wind at Bournemouth on the 12th of July would be gusting at 25 miles per hour, strong enough to test any aircraft and lethal for one that had been modified 48 hours before it flew. Chapter 6. 80 feet and a broken tailplane. Claude Graham White begged the judges to cancel the competition because the wind was too dangerous, and the judges refused. The date was the 12th of July, 1910. The Bournemouth Aviation Meeting was in its third day. The flying field at Southbourne sat on open ground near the coast, exposed to the sea wind that rolled in from the English Channel with no hills or buildings to break its force. By midday, the gusts were sustained and unpredictable, swinging in direction without warning. Several pilots had already expressed concern. Graham White, one of the most respected aviators in Britain and a man who understood the limits of the machines he flew, formally requested that the landing competition be postponed until the wind dropped. The judges conferred among themselves, looked at the program, considered the crowd, and declined. The schedule would proceed. Charles Rolls had entered the competition in his Wright Flyer, a biplane of spruce, ash, and fabric with a wingspan of just over 41 feet. The aircraft weighed roughly 800 pounds and flew at speeds between 30 and 45 miles per hour. It was steered by a system of wing warping and a forward-mounted elevator that the pilot controlled through a pair of levers. The machine was fragile by any standard, a structure of sticks and cloth held together by piano wire and the optimism of its era. 2 days earlier, a modification had been made to the tailplane. The original American design had been replaced with a French variant, lighter in construction and intended to improve lateral stability. The modification had not been extensively tested. It had certainly never been tested in winds of 25 miles per hour. No one in Rolls's circle raised an objection to the change. The modification was considered an improvement. Aviation in 1910 was an industry built on intuition and trial, and not every trial ended in success. Rolls took off in the early afternoon. He was attempting a precision landing competition, aiming to touch down as close as possible to a marked spot on the field. He had done this many times before. The exercise required control, judgment, and a feel for the aircraft's behavior in the seconds before touchdown, exactly the skills Rolls had spent 2 years developing. He circled the field, judged the wind, turned into it, and began his descent. At approximately 80 feet above the ground, something broke. The tailplane separated from the rear of the aircraft. Witnesses described the flyer pitching forward suddenly, its nose dropping as though an invisible hand had shoved it earthward. There was no explosion, no fire, no sound except the wind, and then the terrible silence of a machine that was no longer flying, but falling. A wooden frame tumbled out of the sky with a man inside it who had no parachute, no ejection mechanism, no way to save himself. The Wright Flyer struck the ground almost vertically. The impact drove the engine into the earth and collapsed the wings on top of the wreckage. Charles Stewart Rolls, third son of Baron Langatic, the first man to cross the English Channel twice without landing, the co-founder of the most admired car company in Britain, was killed instantly. He was 32 years old. He was the 11th person in history to die in a powered aircraft crash. He was the first Briton. The crowd at Southbourne fell silent. 10,000 people had come to watch men fly. Now they had watched a man die. The silence lasted seconds and then broke into weeping. Rolls was not merely a pilot. He was an aristocrat, a celebrity, a national figure whose name was painted on the finest cars in the country. Women in the grandstand fainted. Men removed their hats and stood bareheaded in the wind. The competition was immediately abandoned. The news reached Derby by telegram that afternoon. Henry Royce received it in his office at the Nightingale Road factory. According to those who were present, he sat down, read the telegram a second time, and wept. It was one of the only times his colleagues ever saw him display emotion that was not connected to the quality of a component. Then he dried his face and went back to work. There was nothing else he knew how to do. Claude Johnson handled the public response with the same quiet competence he brought to everything. He issued a statement of grief on behalf of the company. He arranged for Rolls Royce to be represented at the funeral, and he began the difficult, invisible work of ensuring that the death of a founder did not become the death of the brand. The name Rolls Royce was already larger than either man. Johnson's task was to make sure it stayed that way. Rolls was buried at Langatic Church near the Hendray, the estate where he had grown up among thousands of acres, ancient trees, and the privileges of a world that was about to disappear. His father, Lord Langatic, was devastated. The Baron had already lost confidence that the old order could endure. Now he had lost the son who had most embodied its restless energy. The family's future was narrowing year by year. The tailplane modification haunted those who knew the details. It had been fitted just 48 hours before the crash. The French design was lighter than the American original, but structurally less robust. In calm air, it might have functioned adequately for months. In 25-mile-per-hour gusts at Bournemouth, on an aircraft flown by a pilot who trusted it completely, it failed. Whether the crash was caused primarily by the modification, by pilot error in judging the wind, or by the gusts themselves was never conclusively determined. The inquest returned a verdict of accidental death. No one was blamed. No procedure was changed, but the consequence was absolute. Rolls Royce had lost the man whose charm, connections, and restless energy had carried the company from a Manchester workshop to the front page of every motoring journal in Britain. The name remained on the radiator. The man behind it was in the ground, and in Derby, the man behind the other name was breaking down. Royce had always worked as though rest were a form of moral failure. Now, without Rolls, without the counterweight of the showman's energy, without even the distraction of an argument to win, he worked as though stopping would be the end of him. He skipped meals. He ignored pain. He slept on a camp bed beside his drawing board when he slept at all. The company had lost one founder to the sky. It was about to lose the other to his own body. And the only man who could hold what remained together was the one whose name appeared on nothing at all. Chapter 7. The Perfectionist's Body Surrenders. By 1911, the man who had built the best car in the world could barely stand up. Henry Royce had been ill for years before anyone outside his closest circle noticed. The symptoms had been accumulating since the early days in Manchester, long before the move to Derby, long before the Silver Ghost, long before any of the triumphs that made his name famous. Stomach pain that arrived without warning, exhaustion that sleep could not repair, weight loss that made his already slight frame look hollowed out. He ignored them all. Illness was an imperfection, and Royce did not tolerate imperfection in anything, including his own body. He treated his stomach the way he treated a misbehaving crankshaft. He refused to acknowledge that it might have limits he could not overcome through force of will. But the body does not negotiate. The body does not respond to inspection reports or engineering drawings, or the fierce determination of a man who will not accept weakness. By the end of 1910, following the shock of Rolls's death and the intensification of his already punishing work schedule, Royce's condition deteriorated sharply. He collapsed at the factory. He collapsed again at home. His doctors examined him and delivered a diagnosis that would have stopped most men entirely. Severe intestinal complications, possibly cancerous, certainly life-threatening. The doctors warned that he might not survive treatment, let alone continue working at the pace that had defined his life. Johnson, who had already saved the company from the public consequences of losing one founder, now faced a private crisis of equal magnitude. The man who designed everything, who approved everything, who was everything the company needed to function at the level the world expected, was dying. Johnson did what Johnson always did. He took charge quietly and completely. He did not convene a board meeting. He did not issue a press statement. He simply arranged for Royce to leave Derby, not for a weekend, not for a holiday, for good. Johnson understood that the factory was killing Royce. The 16-hour days, the skipped meals, the camp bed beside the drawing board, the refusal to rest, all of it was accelerating a decline that nature had started and stubbornness was finishing. Johnson took Royce south, first to the English coast, where the sea air offered some relief, then across the Channel to France, where the climate was warmer and the food was gentler, then onward to Italy, and eventually to Egypt, where they spent the winter of 1911 to 12. Johnson chose hotels, managed travel schedules, supervised meals, and sat with Royce through nights of pain and restlessness. He was not a doctor. He was not a nurse. He was something the medical profession could not provide, the one man Royce trusted enough to obey. When Johnson said rest, Royce rested. When Johnson said eat, Royce ate. When anyone else gave the same instructions, Royce ignored them and went back to his drawings. In 1912, Royce underwent surgery that his doctors expected to be fatal. The operation removed a significant portion of his intestines and left him dependent on a carefully managed diet for the rest of his life. He would never eat a normal meal again. He would never drink alcohol. He would never walk through a factory again. He was 49 years old, and the life he had built for himself, the life of the workshop, the lathe, the 16-hour day, was over. In the same year, his marriage to Minnie collapsed. She had endured decades of a husband who gave every waking hour to his work, who was absent even when he was present, who treated domestic life as an interruption to be tolerated rather than a relationship to be nurtured. The years of his illness added isolation to neglect. Minnie had nursed a man who would not rest, cooked for a man who would not eat, and waited for a man who would not come home until there was nothing left to wait for. The separation was quiet and final. Royce kept working. Minnie disappeared from the record almost entirely, a footnote in the biography of a man who could design the finest engine in the world but could not sustain a marriage. The doctors were wrong about one thing. Royce did not die in months. He would survive another 21 years, but he survived them as an exile, a genius in a sickbed, designing the most advanced machines in Britain from locations chosen not for their proximity to the factory, but for the gentleness of their weather and the warmth of their sun. Johnson found two permanent bases for Royce. The first was Le Canadel, a village on the coast of Provence in the south of France, where a villa was rented and eventually purchased. The whitewashed house sat above the Mediterranean among pine trees and olive groves, a world away from the noise and grime of Derby. The second was West Wittering, a quiet village on the Sussex coast, where a house called Elmstead was prepared for him. Royce would spend winters in France and summers in England, and he would never again see the factory he had designed. This arrangement should have destroyed the company. An engineering firm whose chief designer could not visit his own works, who communicated by letter and messenger and occasional telephone call, should have fallen behind its competitors within a year. It did not, and the reason it did not was the same reason the Silver Ghost existed. Claude Johnson built a system around a genius and made it work. Then came the war that transformed everything. In August 1914, Britain declared war on Germany. The War Office needed engines, not car engines, aero engines. Engines that could power the fragile biplanes of the Royal Flying Corps above the trenches of France and Belgium. The irony was savage. The board that had refused to build an aero engine for Charles Rolls in 1907 now received an order from the British government to build nothing else. Royce, from his villa in the south of France, designed the Eagle. It was a 12-cylinder, 20.3-liter aero engine that produced 225 horsepower in its early versions and eventually reached 360. It was the most powerful and most reliable aero engine available to the Allied forces. It powered the Handley Page bombers. It powered the Vickers Vimy that Alcock and Brown would fly across the Atlantic in 1919. It powered Victory. The Derby factory, designed for 50 Silver Ghosts a year, pivoted to wartime production with a speed that astonished the War Office. By the armistice in November 1918, Rolls Royce had produced nearly 5,000 aero engines. Those engines generated roughly half the total horsepower of the entire Allied air fleet. The company that two men had founded to build luxury motor cars had become one of the most important military suppliers in Britain, and the man who had designed the engine that dominated the skies had done so from a reclining chair in Provence, too ill to climb a flight of stairs. Chapter 8: Designing from a Sickbed. For 2 decades, the most important engineering drawings in Britain traveled not from a factory, but from a dying man's bedroom. The system Johnson built around Royce's exile was extraordinary in its ambition and remarkable in its execution. At both Le Canadel and West Wittering, Royce worked surrounded by a small team of personal engineers and draftsmen who lived nearby, ate meals prepared by Royce's household staff, and worked on his schedule. They were known simply as the boys. The term was affectionate but not casual. These were trained engineers, graduates of good technical schools, men who had chosen to spend months at a time in a coastal village because the man they worked for could not come to them. The schedule bore no resemblance to normal office hours. Royce might wake at 4 in the morning with the solution to a problem that had stumped his team for days and summon the boys before dawn. He might work for 16 hours straight, fueled by tea and the focus of a man who had nothing else to do with his energy, then collapse for 2 days and refuse to see anyone. The boys adapted. They kept their own drawings ready. They learned to read his moods. They understood that a summons at 5 in the morning meant he had found something, and what he had found would be important. Drawings were produced at the villa or cottage and sent to Derby by messenger. Sometimes the messenger was a junior engineer carrying a rolled tube of blueprints on a train from the south of France to the English Midlands, a journey of more than a day. Sometimes a senior designer was summoned to Royce's side for a consultation that was meant to last an afternoon and stretched into 6 weeks because Royce kept finding problems that needed solving before the visitor could leave. The factory adapted to the rhythm of a sick man's body. Production meetings were scheduled around Royce's energy levels. Design reviews happened when he felt well enough to hold a pencil. Derby waited for West Wittering, and West Wittering waited for Royce's health to permit another burst of work. The system functioned because Royce's mind was undiminished. His body had failed comprehensively, but his capacity for mechanical thought remained absolute and perhaps even sharpened by isolation. He could examine a drawing, spot an error invisible to fully trained engineers who had studied it for hours, and dictate corrections that solved problems his team had struggled with for weeks. Unable to walk through the factory and spot inefficiencies in person, he compensated by imagining every production process in exhaustive detail, running the entire factory in his mind like a simulation that never switched off. His perfectionism extended well beyond engineering. At West Wittering, Royce tested every cook who worked in his household by requiring them to boil a potato. The potato had to be cooked to his exact specification, firm but not hard, soft but not mushy, heated evenly throughout. If the potato failed inspection, the cook was dismissed. He was not being petty. He was being Royce. A man who could detect a vibration of 1/10,000th of an inch could certainly detect an improperly boiled potato, and the principle was the same. Do it right or do not do it at all. He grew fruit in his garden and inspected each piece before it was served. He redesigned the layout of his flower beds with the same technical precision he applied to cylinder heads. He supervised the construction of a small glass house as though it were a test facility for jet engines. These habits were not eccentricities to be smiled at and indulged. They were expressions of the same relentless impulse that had driven a barefoot newspaper boy to become the greatest engineer of his generation. Royce could not turn it off. The switch did not exist. He could not accept that a potato, a rose, a connecting rod, or a human relationship could be merely adequate. Everything had to be right. Everything had to be refined. In October 1928, something happened on the beach at West Wittering that would change the course of aviation history. Royce was walking on the sand, slowly and with assistance, watching the waves and thinking about engines. The Schneider Trophy race, an international seaplane speed competition that had become a matter of fierce national prestige, was approaching. The Air Ministry wanted Britain to win. They needed an engine powerful enough to propel a racing seaplane faster than anything the Italians or the Americans could build. The existing Rolls Royce Buzzard engine was good, but not good enough. Something new was needed. Royce knelt on the wet sand and began to draw with a stick. He sketched the outline of a new engine based on the Buzzard's architecture, but transformed by a supercharger system that would force air into the cylinders at pressures no previous engine had attempted. The drawing was rough. The sand was a poor medium, but the concept was complete. He called it the R engine. The first version of the R produced 825 horsepower. Within 3 years, through the relentless development process that Royce demanded and his team delivered, the engine reached 2,783 horsepower. The number was almost incomprehensible. An engine that produced nearly 3,000 horsepower from 12 cylinders was not merely powerful, it was revolutionary. The Supermarine S6B, powered by the R engine, won the Schneider Trophy outright for Britain in 1931, setting a world speed record of over 400 miles per hour. The R engine was more than a racing triumph. It was a proof of concept. It demonstrated that a supercharged 12-cylinder engine could produce power densities that the aviation industry had believed were a decade away. The design lessons, the metallurgy, the cooling systems, the supercharger technology, all of it would flow directly into Royce's final and greatest project, an engine initially known by the internal designation PV-12. The world would come to know it as the Merlin, but Royce would not live to hear it roar. Chapter 9. A family erased by war and speed. Within 6 years of Charles Rolls's death, every one of Lord Langaddock's 3 sons was gone, and the family name was finished. Lord Langaddock himself died on the 18th of October, 1912, 2 years and 3 months after burying his youngest son. He was 75 years old. His grief, according to those who attended him in his final months, had never lessened. He had watched Charles grow from the boy who shocked his schoolmates with electrical pranks into one of the most celebrated men in Britain. And then he had watched him fall out of the sky at Bournemouth. No father recovers from that. Lord Langaddock did not try. He withdrew into the Hendres grounds, walked the parkland alone, and waited for the end that arrived 2 years later. The barony passed to his eldest surviving son, John Maclean Rolls. But the eldest son was not destined to carry it long. Henry Allen Rolls, the second son, was killed on the 12th of February, 1916. He was serving as a captain in the First World War, one of the hundreds of thousands of young men from every level of British society who went into the trenches and did not come out. The details of his death were recorded in the dry language of military communiques. Killed in action, Western Front. He was buried in France, far from Monmouthshire, far from the valley of the River Mono and the parkland of the Hendra. 4 months later, on the 1st of July, 1916, the first day of the Battle of the Somme, John Maclean Rolls was killed. The last Baron Langaddock of the Rolls line died in the worst military disaster in British history, a day on which nearly 20,000 British soldiers were killed and another 40,000 wounded. His death was one among multitudes. There were no male heirs. The barony became extinct. The title died with the man. The Hendra, the estate of thousands of acres where Charles had grown up, where the telephone had been installed in 1881, where the young aristocrat had first dreamed of speed and flight, passed to his sister. The family that had produced one of the most famous names in automotive history was extinguished within a single generation by speed and by war. This was not exceptional. It was typical. The First World War consumed the British aristocracy with a thoroughness that decades of peacetime decline could never have achieved. Roughly 1 in 5 peers, or sons of peers, who served in the conflict was killed. The great country houses lost their heirs, their estate workers, their tenant farmers, and in many cases, their economic purpose. The death duties imposed after the war forced the sale of hundreds of estates. The world that had created Charles Rolls, the world of country house weekends and London seasons, of imperial confidence and inherited certainty, was shattered between 1914 and 1918. Rolls Royce survived because it had already made the transition that the old aristocratic order could not. The company, born from aristocratic patronage and working-class genius, had transformed itself into an industrial and military power. The Silver Ghost, the car built for Delhi Durbars and country house arrivals, was sharing factory space with aero engines destined for the skies above the Western Front. The gilded world that had bought the Ghost was bleeding to death in Flanders. The company that had served that world was building the machines that fought above it. After the war, the transformation accelerated. In 1921, Rolls Royce opened a second factory in Springfield, Massachusetts, to build Silver Ghosts for the American market. American buyers wanted British prestige, but disliked British delivery times. The Springfield factory produced nearly 3,000 chassis before it closed in 1926. In 1925, the Silver Ghost was finally retired after an 18-year production run and replaced by the new Phantom, later known as the Phantom 1. The new car was faster, more powerful, and in every way more modern than its predecessor. It was also more expensive. The Phantom was a machine for the new rich as much as the old, for American industrialists as much as British aristocrats. In 1931, Rolls-Royce acquired Bentley Motors from receivership. Bentley, the company founded by W.O. Bentley to build fast, robust touring cars, had fallen into financial difficulty during the Great Depression. Rolls-Royce purchased the assets and the name, absorbing a rival that had challenged its dominance of the British luxury market. The acquisition was controversial. Bentley loyalists accused Rolls-Royce of buying the company to suppress it. Royce, characteristically, ignored the controversy and focused on making the cars better. He oversaw all of it from his exile, from Le Canadelle in winter and West Wittering in summer. The sick old man in the reclining chair directed the company's engineering with an authority that distance could not diminish and illness could not weaken. But the body that had been failing since 1910 was reaching its final stage. By 1932, Royce could no longer walk without assistance. His weight had dropped to alarming levels. His energy came in shorter and shorter bursts, separated by longer and longer periods of exhaustion. The boys still arrived with their drawings. Royce still corrected them. But the corrections took longer now. The pencil was heavier in his hand. He knew what was coming. He did not discuss it. Henry Royce did not discuss things he could not fix. Instead, he kept working. There was always one more drawing to review, one more tolerance to tighten, one more idea to capture on paper before the light went out. The Merlin engine, the project that would define Rolls-Royce for a century, existed only in preliminary form. The PV-12 had run on the test bench at Derby. It showed enormous promise. But it was not yet the engine that would power the Spitfire and the Hurricane and the Lancaster. That transformation required years of development that Royce would not have. He had one more night, one more sketch, one more instruction to send to the boys in Derby. Chapter 10: The Last Envelope. On his final night alive, Henry Royce sketched a shock absorber design and told his nurse to post it to Derby. It was the evening of the 21st of April, 1933. Royce was at Elmstead, his house in West Wittering, attended by his nurse, Ethel Aubin. He was 70 years old. He weighed far less than he should have. His intestinal condition, managed for 21 years through diet, willpower, and the relentless intervention of those who cared for him, had finally overwhelmed all defenses. Earlier that week, a Bentley 3.5-liter had been brought to West Wittering for Royce's inspection. The car was one of the first products to emerge from the Bentley acquisition, a machine designed and built to Rolls Royce standards, but carrying the Bentley name and intended for a buyer who wanted speed as much as silence. Royce examined it with the thoroughness that had defined his entire career. He sat in the passenger seat while a driver took the car through the Sussex lanes. He listened. He felt the road through his body. He was pleased with most of what he found. But the ride was not right. A fast car, he told his engineers, needed adjustable springing. The suspension absorbed small bumps adequately, but could not cope with the more violent inputs of high-speed cornering on imperfect roads. The damping was too soft at one end of the range and too harsh at the other. It needed a mechanism that allowed the driver to adjust the firmness to suit the road conditions and the pace of driving. That evening, alone in his bedroom, he sat up in bed and asked Ethel Aubin for something to write on. There was no drawing paper at hand. She brought him an envelope. He took it, turned it to the blank side, and began to sketch. The design was for a friction-type shock absorber with an adjustable mechanism that could be tuned by the driver. The drawing was small, constrained by the size of the envelope, but precise and complete. It showed the key dimensions, the friction surfaces, the adjustment mechanism, and the mounting points. It was not a doodle. It was not a fragment. It was a finished concept, the kind of drawing that an engineer at Derby could take to the workshop and begin building a prototype from the next morning. He handed the envelope to Ethel Aubin. "Send it to the boys in Derby," he said. Then he lay back on his pillow. He died the following morning, the 22nd of April, 1933. He was 70 years old. He had been designing for 50 of those years, from the candlelit evenings in Leeds to the final envelope at West Wittering. He had not stopped because he chose to. He had stopped because his body made the choice his mind refused to make. The envelope arrived at the Nightingale Road factory after its creator was already gone. The engineers opened it, studied the sketch, and understood. The old man had been working until the last possible moment. The design was sound. The concept was practical. The precision was unmistakable. The red letters RR on the Rolls Royce radiator badge, which had been red since the company's founding, were changed to black. The official explanation was a mark of mourning. They have remained black ever since, a permanent memorial in enamel and chrome to the man who would not stop. Royce was cremated. His ashes were interred at the parish church in Alwalton, the village in Huntingdonshire, where his father's flour mill had stood and failed, where his story had begun in poverty 7 decades before. The boy who had sold newspapers barefoot on a London railway platform had come home to the village where everything had gone wrong, and where nothing, except his own will, had ever suggested that anything would go right. The Merlin engine, the design he had set in motion but never lived to complete, would be developed by his team over the following years. By 1936, it was powering the prototype Spitfire. By 1940, it was powering the Hurricanes and Spitfires that fought the Battle of Britain. By 1943, the Lancaster bomber carried 4 Merlins, and the strategic bombing campaign that helped break the German war machine depended on an engine whose origins lay in a sketch drawn in the sand on a Sussex beach by a dying man. Royce never knew. He never saw a Spitfire. He never heard the Merlin's distinctive howl at full throttle. He gave everything to the pursuit of perfection, and perfection repaid him by consuming his health, his marriage, and his chance to witness what his life's work ultimately made possible. Chapter 11: The Ghost That Outlived Its Makers. The original Silver Ghost is now worth $35 million, and by law, it can never leave Britain. Chassis number 60,551. The car Claude Johnson drove 27 times between London and Glasgow in 1907. The car that proved the best car in the world was British, survives. It has been maintained in running condition for more than a century. It is owned by Sir Michael Kadoorie, the Hong Kong billionaire and hotelier, who acquired it through private sale. The car is insured for approximately $35 million. An export bar imposed by the British government prevents it from leaving the United Kingdom, on the grounds that it constitutes a national treasure of cultural and historical significance. A car that cost £985 as a bare chassis in 1907 is now worth more than many of the estates whose owners once drove it. The Hendry, the Monmouthshire estate where Charles Rolls grew up among thousands of acres, servants, and the ancient certainties of the landed gentry, is now a golf club. The Rolls Arms Hotel in the nearby village still carries the family name. The house itself still stands, but its grounds have been carved into fairways and greens and bunkers. The telephone installed in 1881 is long gone. The gasworks have been dismantled. The barony is extinct. The family left no direct male descendants to carry the name or the title. The Derby factory on Nightingale Road, where Royce designed the windows and the workflow and the culture of perfection, closed in 2008 after exactly 100 years of continuous operation. Production had moved to other facilities. The building was repurposed. The test beds where every Silver Ghost engine had been run until Royce was satisfied fell silent for the first time in a century. The Spirit of Ecstasy, the silver figurine that adorns every Rolls Royce radiator, carries its own shadow. The model was Eleanor Thornton, a young woman who served as the secretary and companion of John Walter Edward Douglas Scott Montague, the second Baron Montague of Beaulieu, a prominent motoring enthusiast and politician. The sculptor Charles Robinson Sykes created the figurine in 1910, the same year Rolls died, basing the figure of a woman leaning into the wind with her robes streaming behind her on Eleanor's features and form. The image became the most recognized automotive emblem in the world. Eleanor Thornton's own death was a casualty of the next war that came. On the 30th of December, 1915, the SS Persia was torpedoed without warning by a German submarine in the Mediterranean Sea, south of Crete. The ship sank in 5 minutes. Montague was pulled from the water and survived. Eleanor was not found. She was 33 years old. The silver woman leaning forward on every Rolls-Royce bonnet is a memorial to a love affair between an aristocrat and his secretary, and to a life ended by a torpedo in warm water far from home. Royce's ashes were later moved from their original resting place and reinterred at Alwalton Church, in the village of his birth, close to where the flour mill had stood and failed, and where his father had died penniless. A memorial window was installed in Westminster Abbey, in the north aisle of the nave, recognizing his contribution to British engineering. The window places Royce among some of the most celebrated figures in the history of the nation. The barefoot boy from the railway platform ended up in the Abbey. Claude Johnson, the man whose name appears on no radiator, who held the company together through the death of one founder and the exile of the other, who named the Silver Ghost and drove it to prove its worth, and carried Royce through Europe searching for a climate that might keep him alive, died on the 11th of April, 1926. He was 62 years old. He had served as the managing director of Rolls Royce for 20 years. The company's survival through its most turbulent decades was his achievement. He is remembered, when he is remembered at all, as the hyphen in Rolls Royce. It is the most important punctuation mark in the history of the motor car. The two founders lie in different counties. Rolls at Langaddock, among the remnants of an extinguished aristocracy. Royce at Alwalton, in the village where his story began. They are separated in death as they were in life, by class, by temperament, by the nature of their obsessions. The name they shared is one of the most recognized in the world. Neither man lived to see what it became. Chapter 12. The price of the best car in the world. The most prestigious brand in automotive history was built on the graves of its founders. This is not metaphor. It is arithmetic. Charles Rolls died at 32. Henry Royce died at 70, but he spent the last 21 of those years as an invalid, exiled from his own factory, unable to eat a normal meal, unable to walk unaided, unable to witness the daily work of the company he had built. The firm that bore their names became the most respected engineering company in the world, powered the aircraft that won 2 world wars, and built motor cars that defined the meaning of luxury for over a century. Neither man experienced any of it. Rolls could not stop chasing frontiers. He moved from bicycles to motor cars to balloons to aeroplanes with the restlessness of a man who could not bear to stand still. Each frontier was more dangerous than the last. The bicycle could throw you on a turn. The motor car could break an axle and leave you stranded in a ditch. The balloon could carry you out to sea with no way to steer home. The aeroplane could fall out of the sky. Rolls knew the risks. He assessed them. He accepted them. He was not reckless in the way that fools are reckless. He was addicted to the edge of what was possible, and the edge, by definition, is the place where things end. Royce could not stop chasing perfection. The flour mill failed, and he learned that nothing is reliable unless you build it yourself. The Decauville disgusted him, and he tore it apart and built something better. The Silver Ghost surpassed every car in the world, and he kept refining it, not because the market demanded improvement, but because his own standard did. He worked until his body broke. He worked after his body broke. He worked until the last night of his life, sitting up in bed, sketching on the back of an envelope, because stopping was the one imperfection he could not tolerate. The quality that made Rolls extraordinary, his hunger for the next thing, was the quality that killed him. A man who is always moving toward the frontier will eventually reach the place where the frontier gives way. For Rolls, that place was 80 feet above a field in Bournemouth, where a tailplane that had been modified 2 days earlier separated from his aircraft and sent him to the earth. The quality that made Royce extraordinary, his refusal to accept anything less than the absolute best, was the quality that consumed his health, his marriage, and his chance to witness his own legacy. A man who cannot stop working will eventually be stopped by his own body. For Royce, that reckoning came not as a single event, but as a slow, decades-long surrender, organ by organ, meal by meal, until the only thing left that still functioned perfectly was his mind. The thing that makes you great is the thing that destroys you. This is not a lesson anyone learns in time to change course. It is a truth that only becomes visible in the rearview mirror when the damage is done and the biography is written. Between them stood Claude Johnson. He was not a genius. He was not an aristocrat. He was not an engineer. He was a man who understood that genius without management is chaos, that ambition without structure is destruction, and that two brilliant men pointed in opposite directions will tear a company to pieces unless someone stands in the middle and holds the seam together. Johnson named the Silver Ghost. Johnson drove it 15,000 miles to prove its worth. Johnson carried Royce through France and Italy and Egypt, searching for a climate that might keep him alive long enough to design one more engine. Johnson is the reason the company survived the death of one founder and the collapse of the other. His name is on nothing. His contribution is in everything. What survives is the work. The Silver Ghost still runs. A century after it first covered the road from London to Glasgow without breaking down, the Merlin engine still echoes in the memories of nations that were saved by the aircraft it powered. The spirit of ecstasy still leans into the wind on every Rolls Royce radiator, a silver figure modeled on a young woman who drowned when a torpedo struck her ship in the Mediterranean. Royce left a 4-word instruction to his drawing office, words that were painted on the wall of the design department at Derby and remained there for decades. 4 words that capture everything he was and everything it cost him. Rub out, alter, improve, refine. These were not instructions for building a car. They were instructions for a life. And the life they described was one that never rested, never settled, never paused long enough to look at what it had already made and say, "This is enough. This is good. This can stop." The most prestigious brand in the world was built by 2 men who could not stop. One was stopped by gravity at the age of 32. The other was stopped by his own body at the age of 70. Though the stopping had begun 21 years before the end. The question they leave behind is the question that every pursuit of excellence must eventually answer. What is perfection worth when it costs you everything?